Air power and military space systems have revolutionized the way the U.S. military operates, and the global economy increasingly depends on reliable and secure access to space systems. The Aerospace Security Project at CSIS examines the technological, budgetary, and policy issues affecting the air and space domains. Our research is focused in 3 areas. Space security examines the evolving military uses of space and how the lack of norms of behavior can affect escalation and deterrence. It explores how alternative architectures and new space capabilities can enhance the resilience of U.S. military space systems. Air dominance and long-range strike looks at the future of air and missile forces in a more contested operating environment. It examines the role of stealth, unmanned systems, and autonomous systems, how these capabilities can be integrated to enable new operational concepts, and options for the air and ground-based legs of the nuclear triad. Commercial and civil space explores international partnerships in space, efforts to reduce the cost of launch, advances in commercial space technologies, and policy issues that affect civil and commercial space programs. The goal of the Aerospace Security Project is to provide innovative, insightful, and timely analysis to help educate and inform decision makers. As new opportunities, threats, and technologies emerge, smart policy decisions can ensure the United States continues to lead in the air and space domains. Welcome to the Aerospace Security Project.
The Defense Acquisition System has given the United States military an unmatched technological advantage for over 70 years. Along with its legendary complexity, it's brought us the Abrams tanks, the nuclear aircraft carrier, the amphibious assault vehicle, and the B-2 bomber. Today it spends more than $300 billion a year, nearly 3 times as much as Amazon's annual worldwide sales. Over 150,000 people and almost 2,000 pages of rules are employed to make sure that money buys what the military needs. And much like Amazon, you can find just about anything in DoD shopping cart. How hard is it to buy all that? Exhibit A. This simple 500-element flowchart that explains how the Defense Acquisition System works. Let's take a closer look at that framework, though. There are 3 fundamental elements for every acquisition: a need, an appropriation, and a contract. The requirements process defines the need, which is often called a statement of work. The budget process generates the funding, and the contracting process buys the product or service from industry. This structure holds equally for all things in DoD shopping cart, from the simplest to the most complex. For the simplest things, the process can be performed by one government professional in a few days with a requisition order or need, a government purchase card or funding, and a bill of sale or contract. For the most complex acquisitions, hundreds of people are involved in every step of the process over a period of decades. Let's apply this underlying structure to the Pentagon's most complex acquisition program, the Joint Strike Fighter, or F-35. First, the need. In 2000, the Air Force, Navy, and the Marine Corps produced a statement of work for the F-35, also known as an Operational Requirements Document. While there have been some important changes to the document, these basic requirements remain the standard against which the program is judged. Second, the contract. A year later, the DoD awarded Lockheed Martin a contract to develop the F-35 with 3 variants, 1 for each service. And while Lockheed has been awarded several F-35 related contracts, this initial contract remains in place to this day. Third, the funding. Since the decisive competition kicked off in 1997, Congress has provided 20 years of appropriations for the F-35. The estimated total budget is more than $1 trillion, which includes all the money necessary to develop, produce, and operate thousands of this aircraft for over 50 years. To date, however, only about 10% of that amount has actually been spent. In other words, the F-35 is only now moving past its initial stages. This 3-part underlying structure gives us insight into what makes acquisition work better. As the F-35 illustrates, a well-understood requirement, a clear contract that aligns contractor and government interests, and a realistic budget are crucial building blocks to set early on in the process. Even as we seek new approaches to acquisition, These critical elements will continue to form the foundation of any successful acquisition system.
In early August, North Korea threatened to launch 4 intermediate-range ballistic missiles to a point about 30 or 40 kilometers off the coast of Guam. Tom, could you walk us through how U.S. missile defense systems would respond if such a launch was detected?
So if that happens, the United States would first detect the missile's heat signatures with satellites such as the Defense Support Program or the newer space-based infrared system. Those satellites would then cue terrestrial radars, such as the TPY-2 X-band radars in Japan and South Korea, which track the missiles with greater precision. The threat missiles would be within the radar field of view for perhaps 5 or 6 minutes. Aegis BMD ships might also be in position to track the missile's flight.
The trajectory of the missiles headed from North Korea to Guam would take them over the southern part of Japan. They'd fly just south of Hiroshima, and at that point they'd be at an altitude of about 700 kilometers. So, Tom, if the U.S. determined that these missiles were actually a threat to Guam, what systems would be called upon to respond?
If the U.S. determines the missiles to be a potential threat, we might try to shoot them down using various missile defense interceptors. This might include the sea-launched Standard Missile-3, launched from an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, or a land-based THAAD battery based in Guam, or some combination of the two. Both systems have an excellent test record, but neither has been used in an operational context against a ballistic missile fired in anger.
And all of this would happen within a relatively short period of time. So North Korea said it would take about 17 minutes time of flight to reach Guam. Others have said it could take as little as 14 minutes. Of course, it depends on the specific trajectory used. A more lofted trajectory would take longer and rise to a higher altitude in space, while a more shallow trajectory would take a bit less time and stay at a lower altitude.
So an intercept attempt with an Aegis Standard missile would be outside the atmosphere, close to its apogee during its midcourse, or during its downward descent with the THAAD system.
So all of this provides an interesting case study into how such a scenario could unfold and the way U.S. missile defense systems are designed to protect against such threats.
Right. This is the kind of threat that we've seen coming for a long time. This is why the systems are located where they are, the radars and the interceptors, but we hope we don't have to use them. To learn more about both the threat missiles from North Korea and the various missile defense systems, check out missilethreat.csis.org.
The divided Korean peninsula remains one of the largest sources of uncertainty and potential conflict in a prosperous and growing Asia. Unification of Korea will be one of the biggest changes to the geopolitical landscape and is seen by the world as a dark tunnel. Opacity among regional powers creates confusion. Misunderstanding impedes smart planning. False assumptions could cause costly strategic blunders. But CSIS believes the potential for growth, prosperity and peace of a united Korea is immense. How can we maximize the social, humanitarian and economic returns of a unified Korea while avoiding conflict? Beyond Parallel is an unprecedented and comprehensive resource for bringing transparency to the many challenges and opportunities of Korean unification. Beyond Parallel investigates the broader implications of unification, but also the specific issues that Korea and the world face. These critical issues are explored through expert analysis, satellite imagery, and cutting-edge methods of data collection. Welcome to Beyond Parallel. China is rising. Its its economy is now the second largest in the world. China is the world's largest trader, having surpassed the United States, and Chinese military capabilities are expanding. In just a few decades, China has moved from the periphery to the centre of the international system. But what does that really mean for the world? In some ways, China is a developed country, yet in other ways, it is still developing. China's transformation is often misunderstood, and the future of Chinese power is uncertain. Power itself is a nebulous concept. Power can be relative. It can be absolute. It can be perceived and anticipated. So how can we decipher power? Through China Power, CSIS unpacks the complexity of China's rise by analysing the key components of Chinese power. What are China's strengths? What are its weaknesses? Does China's rise present a threat or an opportunity? Or both? What questions are you asking? Join the conversation at chinapower.csis.org.
The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, is a group so vicious and unmanageable that Al-Qaeda expelled them in February of 2014. ISIS uses the ever-expanding safe haven straddling the Iraq-Syria border to pursue a regional Sunni caliphate. Originally intent on striking the regime in Damascus, ISIS has more frequently battled an array of Syrian opposition forces who in turn suspect ISIS of colluding with President Assad. Iraqis dominate ISIS leadership, operate robust local and international funding schemes, and lead several thousand foreign fighters from more than 70 countries in their assault on Iraq's Shiite-dominated government. What do these dramatic developments mean for an already volatile Middle East and the wider world?
Around mid-career, we realize for some reason my colleagues are moving up and I'm not. When you've been working really hard, checking all of those boxes that people tell you to check, and you're somehow hitting some type of glass ceiling and you're not entirely sure how to move up.
Once you get on the path, how do you find the wherewithal, the resources, the community of folks that can help you to continue to grow yourself and make yourself aware of opportunities?
Diversity in our national security is essential. The purpose of our project in diversity and leadership in foreign affairs and international affairs is to bring new voices and diverse perspectives to important discussions in foreign affairs and international affairs writ large.
People who come from such a wide range of backgrounds, they have language skills, they know how to operate interculturally with our counterparts on the other side of the table. We have this rich, untapped potential. How do we make the most of it and really get it into positions that can have an impact?
It's a signpost. It lets you know that there are people who come from places like yours, who look like you do, who share certain types of cultural affinities, certain types of struggles.
I've seen already that you get better reactions in diplomacy, you get better buy-in when you're trying to move forward with development efforts, and you have people sort of understanding that this might be a model that could work for their countries as well.
Food and the way we eat has always been changing. From how it's grown, sourced, prepared, to the consequences on health and the ethics of what we eat. In the 20th century alone, we saw food in many different ways, and today there are many new trends shaping what and how we eat.
6 billion, 7.5 planets.
The age of electronics.
Big data is self-regenerating growth.
Subject to arrest.
The 113th Congress.
Food of the future will involve 3 major drivers: availability, access, and stability. Are current food production and efficiency gains sustainable? With more people, there needs to be more food. Growth of this order requires more arable land and better farming. Most importantly, it requires significantly more water. The effects of global climate change will further exacerbate today's water problems. With the presence of extreme weather, dry regions will be drier and wet regions will be wetter. Access to food is tied to wealth and location. We produce plenty of food on the planet, but not necessarily where we need it. While global hunger and poverty have declined, factors of access and utility still include food income, malnutrition, and obesity. With more people, there is more demand for finite resources: food, water, and clean air. Food shortages, riots, and mass migration will lead to global instability. But there are opportunities for change to avoid this precipice. The world is witnessing incredible advances in food production technology. While these are in many ways considered cutting-edge ideas, not all solutions require radical forward thinking. If the developing world would adopt farming practices that were in place 50 years ago in the developed world, yields would certainly improve. Also, there is a need for continued agricultural research with an emphasis on commercialization. In addition, sources of food such as jellyfish and insects are regular staples in societies that are considered to be underdeveloped, but will continue to find their way into the diets of the developed world. Distributing the food revolutions of today is a major factor in creating a more secure future. The key to ensuring food security lies in the lessons of the past, the people of the present, and the ideas of the future.
On August 2, 2011, President Obama signed into law the Budget Control Act. 5 years later, it's worth reflecting on how it came into existence and what it has meant for the U.S. military. In the spring of 2011, the federal deficit was projected to peak at $1.5 trillion. Republicans had just taken control of the House. Democrats wanted to increase the debt ceiling, but Republicans insisted on dollar-for-dollar cuts in spending. Both sides refused to yield, forcing a fiscal standoff. What emerged was the Budget Control Act, a resurrection of a much older law known as Graham-Rudman-Hollings. The BCA reinstated budget caps for the discretionary parts of the federal budget. These caps were set to meet a deficit reduction target over the next 10 years. For defense, this meant about $1 trillion less than the president had requested. Like the original Graham-Rudman-Hollings law, the BCA created an exception for war funding, but we'll get back to that in a moment. The BCA was really intended to be a forcing function for a broader budget deal, so the law created the so-called Super Committee with special authority to propose a deficit reduction package subject to a simple up or down vote in both chambers. It also resurrected sequestration, the automatic process of making across-the-board budget cuts. After the first year of enforcement, however, sequestration is only triggered if Congress appropriates more than the budget caps allow. Despite much finger-pointing after the fact, the BCA passed with bipartisan majorities in both chambers. A lot has happened since the BCA was enacted. By November 2011, the Super Committee officially gave up, unable to forge a broader budget deal. Throughout 2012, defense leaders repeatedly warned about the consequences of the cuts imposed by the BCA, but steadfastly refused to plan for it.
And now the wolf's at the door.
In January 2013, Congress passed a last-minute budget deal that increased the budget cap slightly for 2013, but it paid for these increases in part by reducing the caps for 2014. By March, time had run out and sequestration was triggered. The across-the-board cuts forced DoD to cancel training, delay maintenance, and furlough more than 600,000 civilian workers. In late 2013, Congress passed a second budget deal that raised the budget caps for 2014 and 2015. Both Congress and the administration stuck to this deal over the next 2 years, thus avoiding sequestration. In late 2015, Congress passed a third deal that also raised the budget caps for 2 years. Unlike previous deals, however, it added $8 billion in war funding for defense and $8 billion in war funding for non-defense. Yes, war funding for the non-defense side of the budget. I told you we'd get back to that exception. The BCA does not provide a detailed definition for what constitutes war-related funding, so in effect, it is whatever Congress and the President agree it is. And because war funding does not count against the budget cap, it effectively creates a loophole. DoD has used this loophole in its budget request by relabeling roughly $25 to $30 billion from its base budget as being Afghanistan-related. While DoD certainly felt budgetary pain in 2013, the 3 budget deals and the use of OCO funding have kept the defense budget near the level it was before the cuts began. Looking forward, the budget caps remain at their original level for 2018 to 2021. These caps were set to meet an arbitrary deficit reduction target without regard for strategy or need, and much has changed in the world over the past 5 years. The caps have also created a pattern of last-minute deals and OCO funding gimmicks that have made rational, long-term planning difficult. To break out of this pattern, the next administration will need to strike a long-term budget deal, or else the last 5 years of the BCA could be a lot like the first 5.
The war in Syria represents a new low for the international community. We're seeing a war without law, as well as seemingly a war without end. It's very, very striking that we're living in an age of the bombing of UN convoys, never mind the targeting of hospitals.
So we were so surprised and shocked when we saw our colleagues covered with their blood and giving their last breaths. I don't know how to describe that. It's so hard emotionally. It's like you are losing one of your precious in front of your eyes.
We're witnessing a profound surge of violence against civilians, against health workers, patients, facilities, humanitarian convoys across a full spectrum of countries that is really shredding the accountability and protections that are contained in the Geneva Conventions.
The attack on Kunduz was a sustained attack over an hour, despite the fact that all the parties knew us, had our GPS coordinate. We must say that it was our biggest loss in terms of lives. 42 people died, 14 of our staff.
This was a tragic mistake.
This is a period when there's the danger of vacuum around the world and a danger for the abuse of power by states that are strong enough to do so. The international sense of conscience and consciousness that led to the responsibility to protect in the early 2000s has certainly been eroded.
People are struggling to respond. They're building clinics and hospitals in underground bunkers. They're documenting these attacks and publishing them. They're taking measures to the UN Security Council.
Stop bombing hospital. Stop bombing health workers.
But up to now, these measures have not had much effect in deterring attacks. But many courageous individuals and groups continue the fight. This is a fight that's going to last well into the future.
We believe that war stopped at the door of our hospital, and we want to preserve that. And we want to preserve access to health care in war zones. That's a battle that's worth to fight.
January 17, Iraq time, marks an unrecognized milestone. The United States has been bombing that country almost continuously for a quarter of a century. What has the U.S. been trying to accomplish with all these air attacks? And what has been the effect? The air attacks have occurred in 5 phases. But to fully understand this history, we need to go back to the beginning of air power theory. The tactical use of air power sought to defeat enemy air attacks and to strike enemy ground forces. But the horror of World War I led some air power advocates to propose a new idea: use air power strategically to strike at an enemy's economy, population, and political leadership, thereby winning wars without costly ground campaigns. The massive conventional air campaigns in World War II, in Korea, and in Vietnam produced many positive results, but they did not by themselves produce enemy surrender. When Desert Storm began, some in the Air Force hoped that new technologies would force Saddam to surrender from an air campaign alone. Others saw air power as part of a joint campaign working with ground and naval forces.
And an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait.
Air attacks did make a major contribution to winning Desert Storm. But as was true of previous adversaries, Saddam did not surrender to air attacks alone. Iraqi civil society and Saddam's government proved to be highly resilient. After the war, Saddam used his own air power to suppress insurrections and stay in power. So the U.S. instituted no-fly zones in the north to protect the Kurds and in the south to protect the Shia. These were successful in protecting the threatened groups, but no-fly zones turned out to be major military operations. Maintaining them year after year required continuous suppression of Iraqi air defenses and periodic attacks on the Iraqi military.
I take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction.
The U.S. launched a new wave of air attacks during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. These attacks looked a lot like those of 1991, with 2 changes. The first was attacking Iraqi leadership directly, called decapitation. The second was called shock and awe, hitting a society so hard and in so many ways that it becomes disoriented and collapses. Both failed. Saddam evaded attack, and although Iraqi society suffered, Saddam did not surrender. In other areas, air power again made major contributions. During the long Iraqi insurgency, air power played a useful but secondary role because insurgencies produced only a few and then very fleeting targets. Many air missions were taken over by UAVs. Their patience and precision matched the nature of counterinsurgency. Over the years, a conventional wisdom has arisen about the use of air power. Decapitation is hard to do, but can sometimes be successful if there is a small group of charismatic enemy leaders. Strategic air attack can cause a lot of destruction, but its ability to win wars on its own is unproven. Battlefield support can be very effective, but it needs a viable ground force, U.S., allied, or local, to win battles. In 2014, President Obama pledged to disrupt and ultimately destroy ISIS. To do this, the U.S. appears to be using air power in all 3 ways. Results so far are again mixed. We've killed several ISIS leaders, but others have replaced them. We've killed a lot of enemy fighters, but so far ISIS has been able to replace them, though with some strain. We provided air support to the Iraqi and local ground forces with some success, but the rollback of ISIS's territorial gains still has a long way to go. What will the next 25 years bring? Air attacks have become a central element of U.S. involvement in Iraq and the broader Middle East. When we are changing regimes, we attack governments and civil society. When we are suppressing terrorism, we attack individuals and cells. When we are...
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. We're delighted to have you here. This was a short notice invitation, and I'm so glad that so many people were able to join us today. Thank you. We'll find our seats. Please, everybody sit down.
Yes, sir.
Great. Thank you. My name is John Hamry. I'm the president here at CSIS, and I want to say a word of welcome to all of you. When we have public events like this, we always start with a little safety announcement. I'm not worried about the Prime Minister, but because he's got people who take care of him, okay? But I'm worried about all of you. I'll take care of you. There might be a voice we'll hear that tells us that we have to leave the room. The exit is right out to the left. We go straight out to to the exit out to the alley, and we'll take 2 left-hand turns, take a right-hand turn, go to National Geographic, and by then I'll have kebabs cooking in the, for everybody. I mean, we're going to be safe. Don't worry about it. But I do want you to be ready in case I do need to ask you to do something. Thank you. It's a real privilege to welcome Dr. Abdullah back to CSIS. He was at our old CSIS. This was back on K Street, and it's the first time we've had a chance to welcome him here. And I want all of you just to think into your consciousness for a second and ask you, what do you think it takes to have the courage to be a leader at a time like this for a country in this kind of strain? This is a remarkable demand on any person, and Dr. Abdullah has been a national leader with genuine courage now for many years. These are challenging days. We were talking about America's obligation to stay with Afghanistan. There are an awful lot of Americans that frankly would like to run away. It would be a lot easier to run away. But that's not something that would honor the courage and the commitment that Dr. Abdullah and his colleagues have shown these years. And we owe it to them to listen carefully about what's our way forward together. And it is a way forward together. And so I want to thank all of you for coming so that we can hear this together. I'm going to turn to Ambassador Tony Wayne. Tony is affiliated with CSIS. He's a distinguished Foreign Service officer, was a career ambassador, the highest rank that we have in the Foreign Service. He's going to set the proper tone for this conversation. Would you please come up, Tony? And thank you, Prime Minister. We're delighted to have you here.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and have this opportunity to help introduce Dr. Abdullah Abdullah. Some of my first memories of working on Afghanistan were in the fall of 2001 and in 2002 when I was working on the donor side and the economic side. And of course at that moment Dr. Abdullah was one of the faces that everybody knew of Afghanistan up through 2006 as foreign minister from 2001 to 2006. At all those key initial conferences as we were trying to work through the political and economic issues, and there was great international support for Afghanistan at that moment, he was one of the key leaders. Subsequently, as you know, he ran for president in 2009 and 2014, and since late 2014 has assumed the position of chief executive along with President Ashraf Ghani. 2015 and 16 were not easy years for Afghanistan. They were very hard years in the economy. They were difficult years because the Taliban seemed to be gaining momentum. And there was a slowing of the pace of reform, and there was division in politics within Afghanistan. But this year, we've seen that situation shift and change. From a U.S. perspective, as Mr. Hamid noted, the United States went through a reflection on its own policy, and there was a serious debate with a number of people arguing for continuing with our commitment to Afghanistan, and others suggesting that that was not the right way to proceed. But in fact, the U.S. policy evolved and came out with a commitment to continued involvement in Afghanistan, and an involvement not based on a time frame, but based on the conditions on the ground. This is an important shift in the U.S. approach. That shift is also looking at the region as an important aspect of moving forward, building and strengthening regional relationships, a special focus on Pakistan and the role that Pakistan has played and can play, but also bringing India in China to have a bigger role and others to have a bigger role in taking this forward, this situation forward, to develop a pathway to a peaceful solution, which is, I think everybody agrees, the ultimate good ending to this process and the conflict that has gone on for way too long. In the U.S. policy that's been agreed, it is based on close partnership with the government of Afghanistan. And that partnership is essential, particularly in the key role which the government of Afghanistan has to play for U.S. strategy to bear good results. And that includes, as there has been, as is noted, a lot of attention here has been on the security side, and the United States is providing more support to Afghan forces. But that support will only really bear fruit as the Afghan government continues to improve the leadership capacity of the police and military forces and to root out any corruption that is evident there. So this becomes a much more effective fighting force for Afghanistan. Secondly, the United States and others are going to continue to provide a great deal of economic assistance. And similarly, on the part of the Afghan government, that means continuing the reforms to make delivery of services and projects more effective. It means supporting the private sector so there can be a more vibrant economy providing jobs for the many Afghans who are looking for jobs. It means also fighting corruption in other parts of the government and in going forward with the judicial reform, which is very important. And there have been a number of important moves in that direction during this last year. Similarly, in the domestic politics of Afghanistan, there are some challenges ahead. There are a number of elections that need to be held, local council elections, parliamentary elections, and then eventually presidential elections. Elections in all countries are challenging, as we remember in the United States from our own experience. So again here, we'll be looking for wise leadership by the political leaders of Afghanistan and wise creation of good pathways forward, including if there need to be any reforms to prepare the way for the elections. And then finally, in all the effort to build regional support, of course, the government of Afghanistan is going to be key. Key in reaching out to those leaders, key in also thinking through and expanding and helping form what might be the framework for an eventual pathway to a peaceful solution. This is a very important set of tasks, a very demanding set of tasks. The United States has committed to support this way moving forward. And we have the great honor today of hearing from Dr. Abdullah and his thoughts about these tasks on the table and the pathway ahead. So it's my great pleasure to invite him to come forward and share his thoughts with us.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished colleague and friend John Hamri, Ambassador Wayne, colleagues, friends, partners, good afternoon to all of you. I am honored to be here to share my thoughts in this institution, CSIS, which has played an important role in global scale in regards to the situation in Afghanistan, our hopes for the future, the current challenges and opportunities. But before anything else, I'm here to thank the American people for their sacrifices, alongside our people for their contributions to peace and stability in our part of the world and to the well-being of our people, contributions in blood and treasure. I'm grateful, we are grateful. We value the partnership as an Afghan citizen, but also today as a member of the unity government. And our people are thankful to you for your steadfast commitment in the past 16 years. And recently, more so, because of the announcement of the South Asia policy by the administration, I would like to thank President Trump and his national security team in administration for the announcement of the policy. It took a little bit of time. A lot of people were anxious here and there, but eventually it came out right. And the policy consists elements that were expected, and including the ones that Ambassador Wayne mentioned earlier. Ambassador, thank you for your introduction, and thank you for keeping an interest in our situation and too many other issues you have dealt with in the past 16 years. You mentioned about 2001, 2002. That was the start of our journey after the tragic events of September 11th, and that's where the United States woke up and took the challenges as it were, rather than as it wished to be. And this has been a long journey in the past 16 years as a result of our partnership with the United States and also other friends and partners of Afghanistan from Europe and elsewhere. A lot has changed in Afghanistan. Life for millions of people have changed. Just visualize for a second the dark era of Taliban that not only they suppressed the people of Afghanistan, men and women, and especially women, but at the same time they harbored terrorists like Osama bin Laden in its networks and enabled them to inflict casualties of no scale, no limit in different parts of the world, including here in Washington as well as in New York. So those were different times, and we tend to forget where we were. And I always try to remind our colleagues, our friends and partners, that had it not been for the reaction after September 11th, the world would have been a very different place, because Al-Qaeda was striding upwards and in big deal, unnoticed to a large extent. So their progress was disrupted. Then, of course, the nature of the threat evolved in many ways, and today we are not done with it. And I think that's that might be the main question amongst the American public, especially. And I will try to come to it in the course of today's event, because I consider it as an opportunity. During a few days of my visit here, I'll have interactions with the administration, with members of the administration, and also I reiterate my feelings and my sense in terms of being grateful to the American people for their support and for their commitment. Before getting to the current situation, the journey I mentioned, the past 15, 16 years, it has been with ups and downs. And we have learned some lessons. And we have made mistakes. But together we have made progress. challenge, the main challenge has been terrorism. At that time, Al-Qaeda. Today, there is Daesh and other terrorist groups, not just limited to the boundaries of Afghanistan, but beyond that. And 16 years of working together, I think you have found out that in Afghan people you have a partner, and you have a serious partner, which is willing to work together, but also to make sacrifices, not only to deal with the challenges, which are the common challenges, excuse me, but at the same time there are opportunities which are not there just for the Afghans, but for the region and beyond the region. Just a few days ago, I was at the American embassy. 4th of July, mainly, I go there. When I was in the opposition, now I'm in the government, but still, I've kept the tradition. But this time around, it was for a very unique occasion. Ambassador Hugo Lawrence, which his term comes to an end these days, he had invited me there. But that was on a project for education. $70 million of US support for textbooks and teacher guidebooks. So as a result, 135 million textbooks for Afghan children in the coming 4 to 5 years. So every Afghan child will have a textbook in each subject, and every teacher will have a teacher guidebook. So this is an investment on humanity, on the future of humanity, stability, peace, in human values. This is just one example, but a very important example. While the fight between the forces of evil, darkness from one side, and the educated, enlightenment will continue. The one source of assurance for our people has been that we are not alone in this. While the terrorists join hands, how to bring tragedy to the families, to the human beings, and how to take people back to the era of darkness, the forces of human values. They join hands, not just to fight against a common enemy, which is what we do, and we will continue to do, but also to invest in the future of humanity. There are lots of good stories which doesn't find traction or attraction in the eyes of the younger generation in Afghanistan, in wider population in our country, which have achievements and materialization of their rights, democratic rights, human rights, political rights, the right of participation, and altogether, since we don't have good memories of revolutions, because there was a revolution in Afghanistan, so-called revolution in Afghanistan. We don't call it revolution, we call it evolution. But in its real term, there has been a revolution in our country. In a country where education was a crime, considered a crime, and only 600,000 people under very restrict circumstances were allowed to schools. Only boys. Limited subjects were taught, to a situation where millions of boys and girls are going to school. Private sector has developed in the main part of our economy. An engine of growth is the private sector today. We have experienced, we have gone through different experiences in the past 16 years, but nevertheless, several rounds of elections, not always without problems, but that has been opted by the people in population as the only way forward, rather than other ways of getting to our rights. The expansion of the role of Afghanistan from being an obstacle for prosperity in the region, turning it into an opportunity for connectivity, for trade, for transit, and exchange of goods and ideas in the region. These are changes in the past 16 years which wouldn't have been possible without your support, without your contributions. So when I say thank you, and when I say we are grateful, we really mean it. Coming to today's situation, and unity government, President Ghani and myself, are committed to make not only the US South Asia strategy, which is an important element in our engagement, a successful strategy, but also in a very interesting part of the world and interesting neighborhood, South Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, with too many challenges and opportunities. The way forward, I'm hopeful, and I'm more hopeful today than before that we will succeed and we will overcome the challenges that are ahead of us. Part of the South Asia policy, important elements, including the fact that it is not based on a timeline, but rather condition-based. That's very important. And when it is said that the political element is weak, I don't agree. The political part of it, the main issue there, that the aim is there that those forces which are fighting against the government of Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan will be persuaded to come to the negotiating table. That is the aim. While the compact between Afghanistan and the United States, it includes elements of governance, reform that we are committed, political process, democratic process, elections, Ambassador Wayne mentioned about it, parliamentary elections and district level elections and presidential elections in 2019. The peace process, the private sector. Talking about the private sector development, while there was a period that the private sector businesses were holding back because of the uncertainty, that was some years back. Now they are forthcoming. Just recently, today, I'm here, one of the business leaders returned back to Afghanistan to invest in a public-private partnership-based scheme, tens of millions of dollars. Energy, gas, providing electricity from gas, now there are two examples of this. In altogether it's worth $300 million. These are good examples. So sometimes the question comes that after all these sacrifices and contributions, why is it that the American forces are still in Afghanistan? First of all, there used to be over 100,000 American troops in Afghanistan. Now the number is much less. But at the same time, parallel to your presence earlier, the Afghan security forces were raised to big numbers and supported and continue to be supported. And as part of the security cooperation, which is also part of that compact between Afghanistan and the United States, your commitment in supporting the Afghan forces in the coming few years, like helping us doubling the size of our special forces, supporting our Air Force, in helping us with reform, and also us taking initiatives in dealing with corruption. These are important elements in the new strategy, including the regional aspect of this. As far as the region is concerned, it's also for us to interact with all the countries around us, the neighborhood, and to convince them and to bring them together to realize that if there is one lesson in the past 2 decades, that is in dealing with the threat of terrorism, that these terrorist groups have not served and will not serve any countries or any state's real interest. At the end of the day, they have their own interest. They have their own interest, which is in destruction, in terror, in violence. I think there are sufficient experiences in our part of the world that has to lead us to decide not to differentiate between different terrorist groups and cooperate in dealing with them, in working together. And that's not just for the interest of one country called Afghanistan, but for the interest of all of us. As far as reconciliation process is concerned, I have no doubt in my mind that absolute majority of the people of Afghanistan are keen to see a peaceful process. Yes, there are challenges ahead of us. And the fact that there were groups, and there are still groups, that they believe that they can overcome, they can take over through methods of terror and violence, and they receive support, and they have sanctuaries. That remains to be a big challenge for us. But I have no doubt in my mind that there will be conditions and circumstances that more and more groups will be convinced that they need to join the peaceful process rather to continue an endless war. I mentioned about private sector earlier. Having one of our colleagues here from African American Chambers of Commerce, a few weeks ago, we were in India and together, and there were dozens of Afghan and Indian companies, and also a lot of U.S. interest in that, working together and making deals between themselves, while it happened in a way that I was supposed to be there a day earlier. There was an attack on Kabul airport, and then the flight didn't take place. But when I got there, I mentioned that they could cause delays, but they cannot stop us. There is no doubt that in the course ahead of us, there will be a lot of attempts and efforts to stop us, to delay us. They can cause delays, but they will not be able to stop us because the cause is the right cause. So on that note, I think since I have covered most of the issues and topics, we don't need Q&A session, yeah?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, let's just for a few minutes. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Good. Okay.
Here or
yeah,
there?
Sure, sir.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. You really covered a lot of ground. Thank you for making yourself available. We really appreciate it. I wanted you to talk about the role of women in Afghan society. We had Rula Ghani here a couple weeks ago, and there's just been incredible progress. And I think a big part of the future progress in Afghanistan is going to be driven by women who are taking on increasing roles, and there are more than 3 million girls in school in Afghanistan. If you could just talk a little bit about that, because I think it's a big part of the hope that many of us have here in the United States about Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you. I mentioned about the achievements. I talked about the progress. These were not achievements or progress made by men in Afghanistan only. Women of Afghanistan were part of this and are increasingly part of this and will be increasingly part of this progress. From a situation where it was a very distant hope, like 16 years back. I remember coming to Washington in late 90s, talking to the audience here, and not being able to keep my emotions down because of the suppression in atrocities which was taking place against the people of Afghanistan, but mainly women. Those stories of those years are not written or not told, and those have remained in the minds, in the hearts of the people, untold stories. Even today, it is hard to explain it. So, first, that situation came to an end post-2001, and then women started right from the beginning. Their main focus at the beginning was the education of their children, but they themselves also participated in the political process, in the elections, in the parliament, being part of the governance, private sector, media, and civil society, and advocacy, and just to give you an example, a few weeks ago, there is a group that I These are civil society networks, mainly in the women organizations. I meet with them on a monthly basis, and they keep me accountable for the promises that we make, and they keep the president accountable. And in the areas that we are slow, they remind us, but they criticize us, and they make us work harder. So that's today the fact that the mentality changed from that era to a new era, where it is realized that development of the country, inclusive development and progress, cannot take place without the rightful position of women amongst men and women in the country. That in itself is a big evolution.
Could you talk about your hopes for prospects of peace?
As a country at war in the past 40 years, around 40 years, you will find the people of Afghanistan most keen and also hopeful to have peace in their country, because we suffer on our people suffer on daily basis, big deal, one way or another. So our best hope is on the wishes of millions of people who are hardworking, who are defending their country against different terrorist groups, which are not their making, but being imposed upon them. But at the same time, hope that peace will prevail in our country. And when I talk about the situation in Afghanistan, and earlier I mentioned a country which was seen as an impediment, as an obstacle, turning into an opportunity, not just for itself, for its people, but for the region and beyond the region. If you just take the natural resources of Afghanistan into account, that could lead to lots of big things in the region and beyond. In the regional projects which are underway today, which we have not stopped because there is fighting, because there is war. We have innovated. We have laid the foundation for a country which will be connected through railways, through roads, through fiber optics, and trade, transit in electricity and power, and all together. These are all dividends of peace, which the people are cognizant of, but at the same time, there are certain other factors which has to be taken into account. Those forces which are fighting against us, the terrorist groups under different names, they have sanctuaries outside Afghanistan. This issue has to be addressed.
The United States recently announced its strategy to support Afghanistan. What do you most want and hope from the United States and your other partners? You have over 70 partners who are accompanying Afghanistan. What do you most need from the international community at this time?
First of all, we appreciate the increase in support which has been announced by the United States, followed by NATO countries and other allies recently. That's important. And it has different elements which enable us to move towards self-reliance. And what we expect is, of course, continued commitment, but also, as it was mentioned by President Trump, we don't need blank check. Yes, the commitment is there, but we are also committed to make it successful by taking serious steps in fighting against corruption, better governance, in also enabling environment for the private sector to develop. And examples of, if you take increase in our revenues, that has happened while we are tax revenues and revenues altogether. In the midst of fighting, when it is, when there are normal circumstances, that's a different issue. But when it happens in the midst of fighting, that's a totally
it's impressive.
Different. So that's our commitment, it's not just expecting from the United States, but also from the countries of the region. There are countries that, for them, they consider Daesh as the main threat, which we also consider as a big threat, as main threat. There is no doubt about it. But at the same time, there is a thinking that since Daesh is the main threat, Taliban might be lesser evil. And there are tendencies to at least to give a hand of support or minimize the
threat.
Or there are countries who consider other groups, for example, the terrorist groups which are there from Central Asian republics as the main threat. But at the same time, the dilemma is that we think that Taliban are a lesser threat. The umbrella is the Taliban for all those groups, and they cannot operate without support from Taliban. Or in the neighborhood, Pakistan considers TTP as the main threat, which we agree. Yeah. We are fighting against them. We consider them as a threat, and we don't make a differentiation between this terrorist group and that terrorist group, and we have never supported any terrorist group in our country, and we consider them the same, and those forces which are fighting. At the same time, we are open to dialogue with the Taliban, and we have kept the door open for that.
Could you imagine a scenario where the Taliban entered sort of legitimate society and there was some sort of reconciliation down the road?
Recently, one of the groups which was fighting against us, which was part of the fighting groups, they joined the political process. And now they are part of the political process. That has not been implemented throughout countrywide in a way that is a group led by Mr. Hikmatyar. It was in the same day there were 3 conferences in 3 different places. One was with the women organizations and civil society and advocacy networks, which were, I learned that there were some sense of worrying among these groups, that perhaps because of we might sacrifice the achievements of the people of Afghanistan, which is symbolized in their rights, in the materialization of their rights, human rights, women's rights, freedom of speech, and so on and so forth, for the sake of making peace with this group and that group. Addressing that group, I told the audience that, look, there is another conference, there is another event in another part of the town by the leader of the group which had joined us. Isn't it better to have these debates in this town rather than having groups planning attacks, rockets or terrorist attacks? So in the course of working together and moving forward, we have this as an experience. It is doable. It's possible. One is the commitment of the Afghan leadership in the wish, in the desire of the Afghan people, which I have no doubt in my mind.
Yes.
The other side is that I hope that on top of every other thing, the South Asia strategy would also help us to persuade more and more groups to join the talks and opt for peaceful process.
You talked about Afghanistan within its region and its place in the region and the potential. Could you just talk a little bit more about that? Because you are certainly in an interesting neighborhood. That's one way to describe it.
Yeah.
And certainly a dynamic neighborhood as well.
Yes, absolutely. In the old days, it was even more interesting.
Yes.
There was the Soviet Union, and now 3 Central Asian republics are neighboring countries to Afghanistan, which we have good relations with them. Level of cooperation, trade,
you share border with China. You share border.
We share border with China. China is our trade partner.
Is it your #1 trading partner today?
Where is it that China is not a #1 trading?
Oh boy, that's a very good question. That's a good question.
And there is the Islamic Republic of Iran. There is the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Well, with all of them, we have trade relations. And yes, of course, at the moment, the trade balance is more towards the imports, but it is changing. Beyond these immediate neighbors in Central Asia and also other parts of the region. So there are 1 or 2 agreements that we will be signing with neighboring countries, including Uzbekistan, in the coming, hopefully, few days, which will help transit. So Afghanistan is connected to Europe through Central Asia and Caucasus, and also Afghanistan used to rely only on one transit route, which was through Karachi. That's not the case anymore. That's through Chabahar, as well as through what is called Lapis Lazuli route, through Azerbaijan to Turkey and Europe. The Afghan people, the younger generation, which are our main source of hope. When we see their energy, their talent, boys and girls, and also resilience, as we call ourselves as old Yangs or something like that. When we, yes, so our times were different. When I was younger, the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, and I thought that the situation has changed, and I have to do something about it, and so did millions of Afghans. Today, there is another type of invasion. All these terrorist groups have found Afghanistan a place to turn it once again into a sanctuary for the terrorist groups, and to pursue their evil ideas. But I think the will of the Afghan people is far stronger than the will of those groups. Not to let them succeed, but turn Afghanistan into a better place for its own people, living in peace within and without, and contributing to the prosperity of the region and beyond.
Many Americans are going, I think, given the progress, and there's been significant progress, and I don't think the American people, it's not covered enough, the successes and the progress your country has made. And there's been an incredible amount of progress in Afghanistan. But in some ways, the way I think American policymakers are going to think about Afghanistan going forward is something akin to the way American policymakers thought about Colombia 15 or 20 years ago. And so the kind of engagement we need to have with you, it needs to evolve and change because of this progress and because of the increased capacity in Afghanistan. And so in essence, we need almost this is a very American and very Washington term, but we need a Plan Colombia for Afghanistan. We need both an economic and a diplomatic component. And we obviously have a willing partner. We have a great partner in you. And so obviously there was a renewed commitment at the Brussels conference. So I remain optimistic. I do want to come back to the question I asked you in the meeting, and you touched on it earlier in your remarks, but I think it's important for the audience just to make sure that we're all hearing the same thing, Dr. Abdullah, which is I'll have Thanksgiving next week, and many of my family members will say, I'll say I hosted Dr. Abdullah from Afghanistan, and my various family members will probably say to me, Dan, why are we still in Afghanistan? And Dr. Abdullah, what would you tell them if you were at my Thanksgiving table?
I thought that...
you say pass the turkey, right?
First of all, you have been with us in this for too long, and that's obvious. It has two sides in it.
Yeah.
First, you have made sacrifices alongside our people. You have made contributions. Your taxpayers have paid, and you are still with us.
Yes.
And lots of men and women in uniform from your country have made the ultimate sacrifice, have paid, and make sure that those sacrifices are not in vain. It wasn't that the United States decided to occupy a country thousands of miles away 16 years back in 2001. That wasn't the case.
No.
There are forces which were evil and enemies of humanity and enemies of our people, but enemies of the United States as well, who created tragedies beyond comprehension. That took you to our country. And prior to that, just to share my personal memories with you, I used to travel to Washington and try to garner support, create some attention towards the situation in Afghanistan. That was between '94 to 2001. Each year, once or twice, I would be in Washington and trying the same thing. And once I met one of friends called David Enso, which is another. I explained this story to him. That was in 2001.
Pre-9/11.
Pre-9/11. And I was saying that, look, these networks are expanding, and if they control Afghanistan, then they will move towards Central Asia. They will turn back towards South Asia, and then I cannot imagine how you would be able to control it. And he listened carefully. He argued. He asked me questions, and I had a map with myself that what were their ideas and what to do. And at the end of it, with some regret, he said that, look, unfortunately, no producer is ready to put money on sending a journalist to Afghanistan and covering the story. And then just a few months from that, I had to deal, that was post-September 11, with live coverage in 3 places in Afghanistan, all agencies. So these, the thing is that acting on time, saves lives, saves resources, saves opportunity.
We can pay now, or we can pay more later.
And my point is, first part related to your question for Thanksgiving was that you will not let the sacrifices of those brave men and women to be in vain. Next to that is that we have a common enemy. That's the next one. But also your contributions has not been just in military and security terms. It has changed the lives of the people. It has helped people having better materializing their dreams. And that's part of your values. And the third part is that if you don't fight them over there, they will come and fight you here.
It's true. It's true.
That's pure mathematics.
It's pure mathematics. Could you just spend a minute, Dr. Abdullah, talking about the kinds, you talked a little bit about in your remarks about the increase in tax collections and the shorthand in Washington is the Afghans stand up, we can stand down. Talk a little bit more about this, how you're standing up, both from a security standpoint and from an economic standpoint.
First of all, in terms of security, there used to be over 120,000 American troops on the ground a few years back. Visualize the cost involved.
Enormous.
Enormous. Now the bulk of the responsibility is taken by our security forces. And you helped us raise the security forces and still supporting us. So that's just a simple calculation will give you the answer. Big deal. And also in economic terms, our resources, natural resources, rare earth materials. These are commodities of enormous significance. And the country is rich with it. The opportunities for investment, the opportunities for the countries around us to prosper through engaging with us and with others. These are the hopes and for self-reliance, and that is happening increasingly.
Dr. Abdullah, how there's certainly always been the promise and the hope of the mining sector, and you referenced rare earths. How actualized, or how much of that is potential, and how much of that is actually happening in terms of mining?
As I mentioned, there was a disruption in between because of uncertainty.
Yes.
That has affected different aspects of our life. And also we had one or two missteps as far as dealing with the contracts were concerned.
Yes.
But we are correcting and remedy those decisions.
Okay.
And we hope that some of the, at least, it's also part of the compact between Afghanistan and the United States. And out of the 4 big mining contracts, we hope that we move one by one in materialization. And some of the one of the examples that I gave earlier about investment in gas and turning it into electricity, in terms of private.
It's very exciting.
As a private public partnership, based on private-public partnership scheme. The World Bank is involved in private sector, Afghan private sector is involved. These are the examples.
Can you, that would be actually useful, just the role of the World Bank has a very large trust fund in Afghanistan,
yes.
and the Asian Development Bank has been really, from an American standpoint, we get the sense they've been a very constructive partner to you. Could you just spend a minute talking about the World Bank Group and the Asian Development Bank? Because I think they often don't get a lot of attention in these sorts of conversations.
Both are partners in helping us. World Bank has this unique role because of the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, ERTF. They are managing the fund there, so that's a unique role. But at the same time, they are also involved in big infrastructure projects.
Yes.
Connectivity
Rural
projects,
roads,
not just within Afghanistan, but within the region. For example, Karzai 1000, which is electricity transfer project that's connects Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan as the source of energy, Afghanistan and Pakistan as the receivers. And there are ADB, Asian Development Bank, is involved in TAPI, which is gas pipeline project, but also infrastructure project within the country.
They help build a ring road.
Railway projects which connects Afghanistan borders with the main cities, and electricity, and capacity building, education. World Bank has been a partner in education, and health. So it's their involvement is multifaceted.
You have 400,000 young people that come into your workforce every year, or you have a very young population. If you were thinking about the economic sectors that you'd like to, that you're hopeful about or optimistic about that young people will enter, what are some of those sectors that you're most optimistic about, or the sectors that you think investors ought to be thinking about when they think about Afghanistan?
Let me give you the context. In the first few years, our main efforts were focused to take children back to school, or to open the schools in universities. So that was the main aim, and that's where millions of people joined schools. Now it's time for us to focus on quality of education, and nevertheless, private sector is also has played a big role. The American University of Afghanistan, which is
it's a wonderful university.
It's a wonderful university, and no doubt that this will be also this became a target for the terrorist groups. But then, so the in the first few years, the focus was just to get the habit of learning to revived. That was the main focus. Now we have to focus on quality of education, and also in terms of vocational training.
Yes.
Because this is one of the areas that is still a country which unemployment is one of the main challenges. Yes. We are short of skilled labor. As we develop the mining sector, we need to establish institutes.
Yes.
And we're talking about railway. So at the moment, for example, dozens of Afghan students are learning in Turkmenistan, one of our neighboring countries, in railway.
Running a railway, how to run a railroad.
How to run a railway, which was not an idea in the past, because there was no railway. So it's in these, and also to bring the focus. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Sorry. That was to get your sympathy, not to.
You have my sympathy.
Not to bring you difficult questions.
At Thanksgiving. You know I'm going to give that answer at Thanksgiving.
And so it's in these areas, in the areas that we have comparative advantage.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Dr. Abdullah, you've been very generous with your time. It's an honor and a privilege to have you here. I have a request of the audience, which is that Dr. Abdullah needs to, when he walks out, I need you all to stay seated when he walks out, and he needs to be able to walk through this pathway unimpeded, please. You know I generally do Q&A, but I think in this instance we're not going to do that. But I have one last question for you, Dr. Abdullah. First of all, I hope you're going to come back and visit us at CSIS soon.
Absolutely.
And you know we believe in what you're trying to do, and we wish you absolutely the very best.
Thank you.
I would like you to leave this audience with what you're most optimistic about in Afghanistan, about Afghanistan's future.
I'm most optimistic about the future of this country when I see the younger generation. Their energy, their aspirations, their resilience, talent, forward-looking, talented, forward-looking, resilient boys and girls, younger generation, sometimes in the hardest circumstances, making the right efforts for themselves, for their families, and for their country. That makes me hopeful. At the same time, being in this and having the support of the American people in being together with it has helped all of us to be more hopeful.
Dr. Abdullah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Abdullah. What an honor. Thanks a lot. You're great. What an honor. You can count on us. We'll help you.